The galaxy went silent on a Tuesday. Not slowly, not with warning. One cycle, 1,000 alien civilizations were burning antimatter across the stars, and the next, their engines were cold, their fleets were drifting, and the most powerful empires in the known universe were completely, utterly, out of fuel. Everyone panicked. Everyone except humanity, because while alien admirals were filing distress calls, humans put the kettle on. If you're new here, hit that like button and subscribe to HFY Endurance Tales. Drop a comment telling us what you think humans would do first in a galaxy-wide fuel crisis. Now, let's brew something legendary. The galactic hegemony had ruled interstellar trade for 3,000 years. Not through kindness, not through diplomacy, through fuel. Antimatter was the blood of the galaxy. Every ship, every station, every trade route in the known universe ran on refined antimatter cores, and the hegemony controlled 92% of all production. They built their empire not on military might alone, but on the simple, brutal fact that nobody could go anywhere without their product. They were the gas station at the only crossroads in the universe, and they charged whatever they wanted. For centuries, other species complained. They filed petitions with the Galactic Assembly. They formed trade coalitions. They tried to develop alternative fuels, hydrogen compression drives, dark matter siphons, gravitational tethers. Every single alternative failed. The physics just didn't work out. Antimatter was too efficient, too powerful, too deeply embedded in every piece of technology the galaxy had built. You couldn't just swap it out. You'd have to rebuild everything from scratch, and nobody had the time or the resources for that when the hegemony's supply ships were still running on schedule. Then, in the galactic year 7204, which humans called 2024, the supply chains started showing cracks. It started small. A refinery station in the outer veil went dark. The hegemony called it a maintenance issue. Then 2 more stations in the Cathara belt reported zero output. Still, the hegemony said nothing to worry about, but traders noticed. Independent captains, who'd been running the same routes for decades, started seeing delays. Shipments that used to arrive in 8 cycles were taking 12, then 15, then not at all. By early 2025, the truth was impossible to hide. The antimatter wells were drying up. The ancient nebulae that the hegemony had been mining for centuries were finally, irreversibly depleted. The most advanced civilization in the known galaxy had done what every empire eventually does. They consumed everything they had, and now there was nothing left. The hegemony's response was exactly what you'd expect from an empire that had never faced a real crisis. They went into denial first. Their science council released an official statement claiming the shortage was temporary and managed. Their military began seizing stockpiles from smaller species, not buying them, seizing them. Their diplomats held emergency sessions that produced nothing but lengthy documents full of words that meant absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, out in the void, ships were stopping. A Thranali cargo hauler, carrying medical supplies to a frontier colony, ran dry 3 light-years from its destination. Nobody came, because the rescue ships were out of fuel too. A Vorkai diplomatic vessel carrying an ambassador to a critical peace summit drifted to a halt in deep space. The summit never happened. Trade routes that had operated without interruption for 2,000 years went completely dark. By the time 2026 arrived, interstellar commerce had effectively ceased. Colonies were cut off from their home systems, food shipments stopped, technology transfers stopped. Communication relays that needed regular physical maintenance started failing one by one. The galaxy, for all its advanced technology and political complexity, was freezing to death because nobody had figured out what to do when the fuel ran out. And right in the middle of all this chaos, on a small blue planet that the hegemony had always considered barely worth cataloging, 2 men named Dr. Quell King, Marcus Webb, and his colleague, Commander Jake Hartley, a former deep space logistics officer, were arguing in a garage in Tucson, Arizona, about whether tea could burn. What happened next would change everything. The galactic hegemony had ruled interstellar trade for 3,000 years. Not through kindness, not through diplomacy, through fuel. Antimatter was the blood of the galaxy. Every ship, every station, every trade route in the known universe ran on refined antimatter cores, and the hegemony controlled 92% of all production. They built their empire not on military might alone, but on the simple, brutal fact that nobody could go anywhere without their product. They were the gas station at the only crossroads in the universe, and they charged whatever they wanted. For centuries, other species complained. They filed petitions with the Galactic Assembly. They formed trade coalitions. They tried to develop alternative fuels, hydrogen compression drives, dark matter siphons, gravitational tethers. Every single alternative failed. The physics just didn't work out. Antimatter was too efficient, too powerful, too deeply embedded in every piece of technology the galaxy had built. You couldn't just swap it out. You'd have to rebuild everything from scratch, and nobody had the time or the resources for that when the hegemony's supply ships were still running on schedule. Then, in the galactic year 7204, which humans called 2024, the supply chains started showing cracks. It started small. A refinery station in the outer veil went dark. The hegemony called it a maintenance issue. Then 2 more stations in the Cathara belt reported zero output. Still, the hegemony said nothing to worry about. But traders noticed. Independent captains who'd been running the same routes for decades started seeing delays. Shipments that used to arrive in 8 cycles were taking 12, then 15, then not at all. By early 2025, the truth was impossible to hide. The antimatter wells were drying up. The ancient nebulae that the hegemony had been mining for centuries were finally, irreversibly depleted. The most advanced civilization in the known galaxy had done what every empire eventually does. They consumed everything they had, and now there was nothing left. The hegemony's response was exactly what you'd expect from an empire that had never faced a real crisis. They went into denial first. Their Science Council released an official statement claiming the shortage was temporary and managed. Their military began seizing stockpiles from smaller species, not buying them, seizing them. Their diplomats held emergency sessions that produced nothing but lengthy documents full of words that meant absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, out in the void, ships were stopping. A Thranali cargo hauler, carrying medical supplies to a frontier colony, ran dry 3 light-years from its destination. Nobody came, because the rescue ships were out of fuel too. A Vorkai diplomatic vessel carrying an ambassador to a critical peace summit drifted to a halt in deep space. The summit never happened. Trade routes that had operated without interruption for 2,000 years went completely dark.
Simple,
By the time 2026 arrived, interstellar commerce had effectively ceased. Colonies were cut off from their home systems, food shipments stopped, technology transfers stopped. Communication relays that needed regular physical maintenance started failing one by one. The galaxy, for all its advanced technology and political complexity, was freezing to death because nobody had figured out what to do when the fuel ran out. And right in the middle of all this chaos, on a small blue planet that the hegemony had always considered barely worth cataloging, 2 men named Dr. Quell King, Marcus Webb, and his colleague, Commander Jake Hartley, a former deep space logistics officer, were arguing in a garage in Tucson, Arizona, about whether tea could burn. What happened next would change everything. The man who walked into Marcus Webb's garage 12 days later was not who Marcus expected. He'd assumed the government would send a scientist, maybe a bureaucrat, someone with a briefcase and a non-disclosure agreement. Instead, he got Colonel Thomas Reeves, 6'2", built like a man who had never once skipped a workout, with the quiet, controlled energy of someone who'd spent 30 years making impossible decisions in impossible situations. He was the head of a classified program called Project Boilover, which had been running for 8 months on virtually no budget and even less hope, tasked with finding an alternative fuel source before Earth's own limited antimatter reserves ran dry. He shook Marcus's hand. He shook Jake's hand. He looked at the prototype kettle and pressure cooker setup on the workbench for a long moment. "This is it," he said. "This is it," Marcus said. Reeves walked around the workbench once. He picked up the small vial of Oolong 7, held it up to the light, watched the neon green liquid shift and pulse faintly inside the glass. He set it back down. "Gentlemen," he said, I need you to understand something. What you've built here, if it performs the way your data says it does, is not just a scientific discovery. It is a strategic asset of the highest possible classification. And I need you to understand that from this moment forward, everything changes. Marcus glanced at Jake. Jake's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened slightly. Changes how? Marcus asked. We're moving this operation, Reeves said simply. We're scaling it, and we are doing it very quietly, very quickly, before anyone else figures out what's sitting in those waste dumps. The speed of what followed was staggering. Within 72 hours, a secure facility outside of Flagstaff had been repurposed as the first large-scale Oolong 7 production lab. Marcus and Jake, you're given a team of 12 specialists. Engineers, biologists, materials scientists, all with top clearances. All briefed on exactly as much as they needed to know, and nothing more. The bacterial cultures were transferred from the garage to industrial fermentation vats. The pressure cooker was replaced with precision pressure vessels the size of shipping containers. And the sludge, the hegemony's discarded, forgotten, worthless garbage, started arriving by the truckload from containment sites across 4 states. The production numbers climbed fast. Within the first week, they had enough Oolong 7 to fuel a small shuttle fleet. Within 3 weeks, enough for a frigate-class vessel. The bacteria turned out to be not just resilient, but adaptable. The more sludge they processed, the more efficiently the cultures worked. It was as if the organisms had been waiting for exactly this environment, as if they'd evolved over their accidental centuries in the hegemony's waste stream to become perfectly suited for precisely this job. But scaling up production was the easy part. The hard part was the hardware. Human spacecraft had been built around a specific fuel profile, the low, steady energy output of conventional hydrogen drives, and the precise controlled burn of antimatter cores. Oolong 7 didn't match that profile. It hit harder, burned faster, and produced a thrust curve that was completely unlike anything human engineers had ever designed for. The first time they ran a full-scale engine test on a converted freighter drive, the fuel injectors melted. The second test blew 3 seals. The third test, after Jake personally redesigned the injector assembly using principles from the fermentation pressure vessels themselves, worked. It ran like nothing anyone on the team had ever seen. The thrust-to-weight ratio was so far outside the normal parameters that the monitoring software flagged it as a sensor error. Reeves stood in the observation room and watched the numbers on the readout with an expression that, just for a moment, looked like pure awe. What's the top speed projection on a frigate running this? He asked the lead engineer, a man named Dr. Craig Sullivan, who had been doing engine performance calculations for 20 years and had the look of someone who'd just been told that gravity was optional. Conservatively, Sullivan said, 0.31 light speed, sustained. With better injectors, potentially 0.45. Reeves turned to look at him. The hegemony's fastest warship runs at 0.22. Sullivan nodded. The room went very quiet, because everyone in it understood, at exactly the same moment, what that number meant. It didn't just mean humans had a new fuel source. It meant that on pure speed alone, a human ship running Oolong 7 could outrun every military vessel in the hegemony's fleet. Every patrol ship, every interceptor, every flagship. The galaxy's most powerful empire couldn't catch them. Colonel Reeves let that silence sit for exactly 3 seconds. Then he said, "Get me a ship ready. I want a full operational test in 2 weeks." The ship they chose was the UES Harrisburg, a beat-up 20-year-old deep space freighter that had been sitting in a government yard in Nevada since its antimatter contract lapsed. On the outside, it looked like exactly what it was, an old, unremarkable cargo hauler. Rust along the port thruster housing, a dent in the forward cargo bay door that had never been fixed. The kind of ship that nobody looked at twice. Jake personally oversaw the engine conversion, sleeping 4 hours a night and spending the rest of the time in the engine room with Sullivan and 2 junior engineers fitting the new injector assemblies and running pressure checks on the modified fuel lines. He had the particular focus of a man who understood, at a bone-deep level, exactly what was at stake. On the 14th day, the Harrisburg was ready. Reeves boarded it with a crew of 7. Marcus was there to see them off, standing on the tarmac in the pre-dawn dark with a thermos of actual tea in his hand. Reeves paused at the top of the boarding ramp, looked back at him. "When this works," he said, "and I do mean when, I'm going to need you to think about something, Dr. Webb. Right now the hegemony doesn't know this fuel exists. The moment they find out, everything changes. Every political equation in the galaxy shifts. You ready for that?" Marcus looked down at his thermos, then back up at Reeves. "I've been ready since the pressure cooker test," he said. Reeves almost smiled. Then he disappeared into the ship. The Harrisburg lit its drive 17 minutes later. The neon green exhaust trail it left across the Nevada sky was unlike anything anyone watching had ever seen. It climbed fast, faster than anything that size had any right to move, and within 40 seconds, it was gone. What nobody knew, not Marcus, not Reeves, not anyone on that tarmac, was that a hegemony surveillance drone operating in low Earth orbit had just recorded the entire launch sequence, and the energy signature of that exhaust trail had already been flagged as unknown by the hegemony's automated monitoring systems. The alert was climbing the chain of command at this very moment, and the hegemony was about to start asking questions that humanity was not yet prepared to answer. The message came in on a standard diplomatic frequency, routed through the Galactic Assembly's public relay network, so that every species with a receiver could see it. The hegemony didn't try to hide it. That was the thing about the hegemony. When they made a demand, they made it publicly, because they had never needed to operate in the shadows. They had always had enough power to say exactly what they meant, directly, without softening it. The message was addressed to Earth's Galactic Liaison Office and copied to 37 other species. It read, "An unauthorized energy signature of unknown origin has been detected in Earth's orbital space. This signature is consistent with a fuel source not registered with the Galactic Fuel Standards Authority. Earth is hereby required to submit full technical documentation of any new fuel development to the Hegemony Science Directorate within 48 standard hours. Failure to comply will be interpreted as a violation of the Galactic Resource Accord and will result in appropriate action." Appropriate action. That phrase had a very specific meaning in hegemony diplomatic language. It meant warships. Colonel Reeves was in the middle of the Harrisburg's second deep space trial run when the message was relayed to him. He read it once, handed the tablet to his communications officer, and said, "How long until the Harrisburg gets back to Earth?" 11 hours at current speed. "Make it 7. The Harrisburg hit .41 light speed on the return run, a new record, which under other circumstances would have been cause for celebration. Under these circumstances, Reeves sat in the command chair and ran calculations. 48 hours was not a lot of time. The hegemony had just told the entire galaxy that they knew something was happening on Earth, which meant that every other species with an intelligence network was now paying very close attention. There were 3 ways this could go, and Reeves had enough experience with interstellar politics to see them all clearly. Option 1, comply. Hand over the Oolong 7 documentation. The hegemony would patent it, control it, and humanity would get a footnote in a press release. Option 2, refuse and get hit with sanctions, or worse. The hegemony's appropriate action could range from a trade embargo to an actual blockade. Earth didn't have a military fleet capable of resisting a hegemony blockade. Not yet. Option 3 was the one Reeves had been working toward from the moment the Harrisburg first cleared atmosphere. Option 3 was make yourself so valuable, so quickly, that attacking you becomes politically impossible. He got back to Earth with 19 hours left on the clock. By then, Marcus had already received calls from the Threnali Trade Federation, the Vorkai Republic, and 2 independent colony systems, all of whom had seen the hegemony's message and were now very interested in what Earth might have discovered. The fuel crisis had not gotten better. If anything, it had accelerated. 3 more major shipping lanes had gone dark in the past week. A Vorkai colony of 2 million people was rationing power because their grid's backup generators had run out of fuel. The galaxy was starving, and Earth might have the only food. Reeves called a meeting that included Marcus, Jake, Dr. Sullivan, and 4 senior officials from 3 different government agencies. It was held in a secure room at the Flagstaff facility, and it lasted 6 hours. At the end of it, they had a plan that was either brilliant or suicidal, and nobody in the room was completely sure which. They were going to demonstrate. Not document, not negotiate, not comply. Demonstrate. Reeves drafted a response to the hegemony that was precisely 47 words long and would be talked about in diplomatic circles for the next 200 years. Earth acknowledges the hegemony's inquiry. Earth will not be submitting documentation. Earth will instead be providing a live performance demonstration of its new energy technology at coordinates attached in 36 hours. All species are welcome to observe. Refreshments will be served. The refreshments line was Jake's idea. Reeves had almost cut it. He left it in. The coordinates were a point in deep space 3 light hours from Earth, well outside any territorial claim. The Harrisburg arrived there 29 hours later, running on a full tank of Oolong 7, with 2 backup batches sealed in the cargo bay. Within 6 hours of Earth's response going public, 14 ships from 9 different species were already holding at the coordinates, waiting. Within 12 hours, there were 31 ships. The hegemony sent 5. That number was significant. 5 ships was not an invasion force. It was a statement. It said, "We are here, we are watching, and we have not yet decided whether to be impressed or angry." It was exactly the kind of response Reeves had hoped for, because 5 ships could observe, but 5 ships couldn't stop anything. The demonstration began with the Harrisburg running a series of timed speed passes at the observer fleet, measured, recorded, verifiable. The speed numbers were broadcast on open channels so every ship present could confirm them independently. When the Harrisburg hit 0.43 on the final pass and pulled a course correction that should have required deceleration but didn't, the communications channels across the observer fleet lit up all at once. Then Reeves did something nobody expected. He hailed the most desperate ship in the observer fleet, a Threnali medical transport that had been drifting under minimal power for 9 days, carrying supplies to a colony that was now running on emergency reserves, and he offered to refuel it, right there, in front of everyone. The Threnali captain accepted before Reeves had finished the sentence. Jake personally supervised the fuel transfer. He floated the line across in a standard connector, ran the pressure checks, and pumped enough Oolong 7 into the Threnali ship's reserve tanks to get it to its destination and back with fuel to spare. The transfer took 23 minutes. When the Threnali drives ignited on Oolong 7 for the first time, the exhaust trail lit up the void in that distinctive, vivid, unmistakable neon green. The comms channels went silent for exactly 4 seconds. Then they exploded. Every species present started transmitting at once, requests for fuel, requests for technology transfers, requests for meetings. 3 different ambassadors hailed the Harrisburg simultaneously asking about pricing. The Vorkai Republic's senior delegate, who had been watching from a diplomatic cruiser, sent a personal message directly to Reeves that said only, "Name your terms." The hegemony's 5 ships said nothing. They held position. They watched, and then, quietly, one of them opened a private channel to the Harrisburg and transmitted a single line. The hegemony requests a private meeting with Earth's representative at the earliest convenience. Looked at it for a long moment. Typed back, "We'll be in touch." He closed the channel and looked at Jake, who was floating back through the cargo bay hatch, pulling off a work glove. "They're scared," Jake said. It wasn't a question. "First time in 3,000 years, Reeves said. Then, the Harrisburg's proximity alarm triggered. Something had just dropped out of FTL at the edge of the coordinate zone. Something large, moving fast, and broadcasting on a frequency that wasn't registered with anyone. The ship that came out of FTL was not in any database Jake had ever worked from. It was massive, roughly 4 times the length of a hegemony cruiser, with a hull configuration that didn't match any known species design language. No visible drive exhaust, no standard comm beacon. It moved with the absolute silence of something that had been doing exactly what it wanted for a very long time and had never once needed to announce itself. Reeves had it on long-range scan within 30 seconds. He got on open comms, broadcasting to every ship in the zone, and said very calmly, "All vessels, hold position, do not engage, Do not retreat. The unknown ship slowed as it entered visual range. Then it stopped. Completely. No deceleration burn. No thruster correction. It simply stopped, the way something stops when physics is more of a suggestion than a rule. Then it transmitted. Not on any standard frequency. On every frequency simultaneously. In a signal that bypassed every translation matrix and landed in the minds of every crew member on every ship in the zone as perfectly clear thought, rather than decoded language. Not words exactly. Concepts. Intent. And the intent was this: we have been watching. We know what you found. We want to know what you intend to do with it. Marcus, still on Earth, received the transmission through the relay link. He sat very still for a moment. Then he pulled up his records of the bacterial cultures and looked at the contamination timeline. The dates, the spread patterns, how the fermentation bacteria had ended up in the hegemony's waste stream in the first place. He had assumed it was accidental contamination from a human research station, but the spread pattern was too precise. The bacteria had arrived in the sludge stream from a direction that didn't correspond to any human facility he could find in the records. Someone had put them there. He got on the secure link to the Harrisburg. Reeves, the bacteria didn't contaminate the sludge by accident. A pause. Explain that. The dispersal pattern is targeted. The cultures were introduced into specific isotope-heavy segments of the waste stream, the exact segments with the highest conversion potential. Someone engineered this. Someone who understood both the sludge's chemistry and what fermentation bacteria could do to it, and planted the solution in the garbage so that whoever found the garbage would find the answer. Another pause, longer this time. Are you telling me, Reeves said slowly, that someone seeded the hegemony's waste dumps with the key to solving the fuel crisis and then waited for someone to find it? I'm telling you that's what the data shows. On the Harrisburg's bridge, Reeves turned to look at the unknown ship on his long-range display. It hadn't moved. It was still just sitting there, waiting. He opened a channel, not to a specific frequency, just outward broadcast, and said, "You left us the bacteria." The response came back the same way as before, not words, intent, and something else, something that felt, if a transmitted concept could feel like anything, like satisfaction. And then in plain transmitted language. For the first time, the hegemony would never have looked. You did. The implications of that settled over the Harrisburg's bridge like a physical weight. This species, whoever they were, had watched the fuel crisis coming, had known about it, probably for decades, had decided not to intervene directly. Instead, they had placed a tool where the right hands might find it. Hands that were curious enough to look at garbage and wonder. Hands that thought about fermentation when everyone else was thinking about physics. Hands that put a kettle on when the galaxy was freezing to death. Human hands. The hegemony's 5 ships had been completely silent since the unknown vessel arrived. Now, one of them broke comms discipline. Their senior military commander came on open channel. An unusual move, breaking from protocol. And his voice had something in it that Reeves had never heard from a hegemony officer before. Fear. Earth vessel, the hegemony commander said. You are in contact with a Category Omega entity. This is beyond the jurisdiction of this demonstration. We demand... You're out of fuel, Reeves said. Flat. Simple. Final. You don't get to demand anything right now. The hegemony channel went silent. Reeves turned back to his communications console. He had 31 ships watching him, representatives of 9 species, and an unknown intelligence of apparently vast capability, sitting 3,000 kilometers off his bow, waiting to see what he did next. He had 19 tons of Oolong 7 in his cargo hold. He had a crew of 7 people who trusted him completely. And he had a decision to make that no political body on Earth had authorized him to make, and no protocol had prepared him for. He made it in about 4 seconds. He hailed every ship in the zone simultaneously. This is Colonel Thomas Reeves of the United Earth ship Harrisburg. Earth is prepared to enter immediate fuel supply agreements with any species present, on terms that will be negotiated fairly and transparently through the Galactic Assembly. We are not claiming monopoly. We are not setting political conditions. We are offering fuel because people are dying and ships are stopping, and that is not acceptable. The only thing we ask in return is a seat at the table, an equal seat. The responses came back fast. Too fast, almost, for Reeves to track. The Vorkai Republic confirmed. The Threnali Federation confirmed. 2 independent colony systems confirmed. Others were already drafting formal requests. Then Jake's voice came over the internal comm from the cargo bay. Reeves, we've got a problem. Define problem. The hegemony's 5 ships just changed formation. They're not in observation positions anymore. They're in a pause. They're in an intercept configuration. They're moving between us and the assembly point. Reeves looked at his tactical display. Jake was right. The hegemony ships had repositioned while everyone was watching the unknown vessel. It was a classic suppression move. Not an attack, not yet, but a block. A message, this stops here. The hegemony commander came back on comms. His voice was steadier now, back under control. The resource being discussed falls under the Galactic Resource Accord, Article 17, which designates all nebula-derived materials as hegemony regulated. Earth does not have legal authority to distribute. Article 17, Marcus said, cutting in on the relay from Earth, specifically excludes materials that have been officially classified by the hegemony as waste and removed from regulated inventory. Every canister of sludge Earth has processed was in your own waste manifests. You threw it away. You classified it as biologically non-reactive and energetically neutral and discarded it. A beat. We just picked up your trash. The silence on the comms channel lasted a very long time. Then the unknown ship moved for the first time since it had stopped. Not toward the hegemony ships, not toward the Harrisburg. It simply repositioned itself, calmly, precisely, between the hegemony's intercept formation and the rest of the assembled fleet. A barrier. Passive. Absolute. The hegemony commander understood what that meant immediately. Everyone did. There would be no intercept today. Reeves exhaled once. He looked at the tactical display, the unknown ship, vast and still, holding that position without any visible effort. The hegemony ships, locked in place by a presence they couldn't challenge. The rest of the fleet, watching, waiting. Jake, he said. Yeah? Start prepping the next fuel transfer. We've got a lot of ships that need filling up. Already on it, Jake said. But as Reeves turned back to the main display, a new transmission was coming in. Not from any of the ships in the zone. From Earth, from the Galactic Assembly Relay Station. An emergency session had just been called, and the agenda item had a title that had never appeared in any assembly session in 3,000 years of recorded galactic history. It read, Proposal to Restructure Galactic Fuel Distribution, submitted by Earth. And the hegemony had just been cut off from every fuel supply they hadn't already lost. The galaxy was about to change its mind about who mattered. And the question now was whether the change would be peaceful, or whether someone was going to do something very stupid in the next 48 hours. The Galactic Assembly session lasted 11 hours. Not because the vote was close. The vote wasn't close at all. Of the 43 species currently represented in the assembly, 38 voted in favor of Earth's proposal within the first 3 hours. The proposal itself was straightforward. A new galactic fuel cooperative, jointly administered by contributing species, with Earth serving as primary production coordinator for the first 20 years. Pricing would be set by a rotating committee. Distribution would be prioritized by need, not political standing. No single species would hold a controlling interest. It was, in short, everything the hegemony had spent 3,000 years making sure would never happen. The hegemony's delegation sat through all 11 hours without casting a vote. Not abstaining, refusing to participate. Their senior delegate, a figure who had run hegemony diplomatic strategy for 40 years, sat in his chamber and said nothing. Watched everything. When the final tally was announced and the assembly chair declared the Galactic Fuel Cooperative formally established, the hegemony delegation stood, filed out, and transmitted a single-line response to the assembly secretary. Noted. That was it. No threats, no counter-proposals, no dramatic walkout speech. Colonel Reeves, watching the session feed from the Harrisburg, while Jake ran the third fuel transfer of the day to a Vorkai relief convoy, said, They're not done. That silence is strategy. I know, Marcus said through the relay. He was back in Flagstaff, watching 3 production vats run simultaneously, the neon green liquid cycling through filters in smooth, steady streams. But right now they can't do anything about it. Their fleet is grounded, their stockpiles are gone, and the species they used to control are lining up at our door. He was right, and he knew it. And he also knew that being right about a wounded empire's temporary weakness was a long way from being safe from that empire's eventual response. But that was a problem for future diplomats. Right now, the immediate problem was production. Demand had tripled in the 4 days since the demonstration, and the Flagstaff facility was at capacity. Reeves had already authorized 2 additional production sites, one in New Mexico, one in Montana, and a third was being scouted in Nevada. The bacterial cultures were being shared under controlled protocols with 3 allied species who had the infrastructure to run their own fermentation operations. It wasn't a monopoly. Reeves had meant what he said about that. Though it would be a long time before anyone else brewed it quite the way humans did. That was the part that alien scientists kept getting wrong. Sullivan, who had become Earth's unofficial lead liaison on fuel technology transfer, spent half his time on calls with researchers from 7 different species who were running into the same wall. The fermentation process itself was replicable. The chemistry was chemistry. But the yield curves were inconsistent. Batches that should have been identical under laboratory conditions were coming out at different energy densities with different burn profiles, different stability windows. Sullivan's explanation, delivered at an assembly science panel to an audience of 50 xenochemists, became the most quoted piece of Earth testimony in that century of assembly records. He said, "Brewing is not a formula. It's a relationship. The bacteria respond to handling. They respond to temperature fluctuations, pressure timing, the microscopic variations in how a human operator runs the cycle. We've been fermenting things for 10,000 years. We have an intuition for it that we can't fully put into documentation because half of it is in our hands, not our heads. We will teach you everything we know. But some of what we know isn't in words yet." An alien delegate asked him, very seriously, "Are you saying the most advanced fuel in the galaxy works better when a human makes it?" Sullivan thought about Marcus in a desert in Arizona, sitting on a rock, staring at the sky. Jake with his sleeves rolled up, running pressure checks at 2 in the morning. The battered electric kettle on the workbench. The pressure cooker. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly what I'm saying." The unknown ship, which the assembly had quietly designated the Observer, lacking any better name, remained in the coordinate zone for 16 more days. It didn't communicate again, beyond one final transmission on the last day before it left. The transmission was directed specifically to Marcus Webb, who received it alone at the Flagstaff facility. At just after 3 in the morning, when he was running a late cycle check. It was brief. It said, "You found it because you looked at what others discarded. Remember that habit. The next answer will be in another pile of garbage." Then the Observer went to FTL and disappeared, and nobody has seen it since. Whether it will return is a question that keeps a lot of people up at night, in a lot of different species. Marcus doesn't lose much sleep over it. He tends to think that when it does come back, it will come back because something else needs finding, and it will put the answer somewhere that only the right kind of curious will look. He's already started checking other waste streams. 8 months after the Harrisburg's demonstration, the UES Harrisburg itself was formally retired from active service and placed in the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum's Deep Space Collection. Not because it was worn out. Jake's engine conversion had actually extended its operational lifespan considerably, but because it had become something more valuable than a working ship. It had become a symbol. On the hull, just below the forward viewport, someone had stenciled a phrase that nobody officially authorized, but nobody officially removed either. It read, "We picked up the trash." Colonel Reeves attended the retirement ceremony. So did Marcus and Jake, standing on either side of him on the museum floor, looking up at the old battered freighter, with its dented cargo bay door, and its rust-spotted thruster housing, and its neon green-stained exhaust ports. A reporter asked Reeves what he thought when he first saw the Harrisburg speed numbers under Oolong 7 power. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "I thought, good. We're going to need every advantage we can get." The reporter asked what he meant by that. Reeves smiled slightly. "The galaxy is very large," he said, "and we're just getting started." The Galactic Fuel Cooperative's first annual report, released 6 months later, showed that interstellar trade had recovered to 68% of pre-crisis levels. Colony resupply operations were fully operational. 3 species that had been on the edge of resource collapse were stable. Projections showed full recovery within 2 years. The hegemony was listed in the report as an observer nation, not a participant. They had applied for a standard supply contract through the cooperative's normal channels, the same channels available to any species. They paid the same price as everyone else. Marcus Webb's name appeared in the report's acknowledgement section. One line, "With particular thanks to Dr. Marcus Webb, whose contribution began with a canister of discarded waste and a working kettle." He read that line 3 times. Then he made himself a cup of tea. Actual tea from a battered electric kettle that he had never replaced, despite having the budget for a much better one. And he stood at the window of the Flagstaff facility and looked out at the desert. The same desert where 3 canisters of glowing green sludge had been sitting in the heat, waiting for someone curious enough to stop and wonder what they were. He thought about what the observer had said. Another pile of garbage. Another answer waiting for someone to look. He was already thinking about where to look next. And that, as the folks at HFY Endurance Tales will tell you, is the most human thing of all. Not the breakthrough, not the politics, not even the speed. The most human thing is what happens after you solve the impossible problem. You immediately start looking for the next one. If this story hit different for you, drop a comment. Tell us what you would have done with that first canister of sludge. Share this with someone who needs a reminder of what human curiosity can actually do. And if you haven't already, subscribe to HFY Endurance Tales. We've got more stories where this one came from. The galaxy is full of garbage. We intend to check all of it.